Welcome. Thank you all for coming out on this really kind of miserable and rainy April day. We're ready for spring. It doesn't seem to be ready for us. So, before I announce anything else, I would like to. Oh, I'm Barbara Weinstein from the Department of History at NYU. And before I announce our speaker today, Keila Grinberg, I would like to announce the symposium that she has organized that will take place in this auditorium on starting Friday, April 27th through Saturday, April 28th. Do you know the start time on Friday? It'll start about 5. It says has the wrong time on the KJCC site, but it'll start around 5 p.m. on Friday and go through Saturday. And the theme, which is related to tonight's talk, but there will of course be several panels, a film discussion, is Slave Pasts in the Present, Narrating Slavery Through the Arts, Technology, and Tourism. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Professor Keila Grinberg. Kayla is Associate Professor of History at Unirio, which is the Federal University of the State of Rio de Janeiro. And it's a good thing it's a Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and not a state university, since the state universities of Rio de Janeiro are being forced by the government into bankruptcy. She's been a visiting professor at Michigan, Northwestern, and the University of Chicago. And this semester, she is the holder of the Andrés Bello Chair in Latin American Cultures and Civilizations of the King Juan Carlos Center. My first encounter with Keila Grinberg was through her 1994 book, Liberata, a lei da ambiguidade, or the law of ambiguity, a path-breaking study of the use of the judicial system by slaves to sue for their freedom. It not only alerted historians to the extensive source material on freedom suits and their role in fueling momentum toward an anti-slavery sensibility, but also considered more broadly what such suits implied for the creation of liberal legal codes and the process of state building in post-colonial Brazil. Kayla's second major monograph, O Fiador dos Brasileiros, which translates more or less as The Guarantor of the Brazilians, is a 2002 book that is a fascinating study of slavery, race, and the law, and nation building, organized around the life and times of Antonio Rebouças, the most distinguished and influential person of African descent during the early decades of Brazilian independence. It demonstrates better than any other study of this period, in my humble opinion, what a struggle it was for Brazilians like Rebouças, committed to a liberal conception of the nation, to square that commitment with the racial inequality and human enslavement that formed the pillars of Brazilian society. The book was a remarkable achievement, and I'm delighted to say that it will soon be available in English, published by University of North Carolina Press. As those of you who attended her first public lecture know, Kayla is currently completing a study of the problem of illegal enslavement, the notion of free soil, and Brazil's international relations and conflicts in the final decades of slavery. Once again, her research will show the way human enslavement and Brazilian elites' effort to maintain slavery as long as possible shaped every aspect of life and politics in 19th century Brazil. And as many of you can guess, its impact didn't necessarily end with the abolition of slavery in 1888. Kayla has authored and edited many other books, not to mention dozens of articles. But aside from her publishing projects, Keila Grinberg has also been tremendously active in initiatives whose impact goes well beyond the confines of academia. She has been intensely involved in training programs for elementary through high school history teachers, the writing of textbooks and texts for young readers, and perhaps most noteworthy, in a range of innovative public history projects. Brazilian historians have been global leaders in public history programming and exhibitions related to slavery and the African diaspora. I think this is thanks to the convergence of a rising black consciousness movement in the final decades of the 20th century and a scholarly community that has made the history of slavery and emancipation its central concern. And Kayla has been one of the most visible and inventive scholars in these public history endeavors. If you'll permit me, and what are you going to do? Force me to say it. I want to end this introduction with a brief reflection on the burgeoning field of public history. A little over a decade ago, I was involved in organizing a panel for the the American Historical Association meetings that would focus on issues of race, folklore, and cultural appropriation. And I very much wanted the key presenters to be public historians. But even as recently as 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, it was difficult to identify colleagues who regarded public history as their main field of interest. And I could tell that some of the people I consulted still regarded public history as somehow not a fully legitimate scholarly pursuit. I don't want to take up too much of what is rightfully Kayla's time by talking about why the profile of public history has changed so much in recent years for the better. But certainly it has a great deal of the impetus for this change has come from popular movements, especially against racism, past and present. But also, for better or for worse, these days hardly anything seems to lie outside the boundaries of the public and the political. With so many different groups at risk of losing their most basic rights, or their homes, or hopes for citizenship, or breathable air and drinkable water, or physical safety. Every day, so much seems to be at stake. And in Brazil, many of the recent gains in the direction of a more diverse and critical public culture are clearly at risk. So in a sense, all history now is public history. And in light of that, we're especially fortunate to have Keila Grinberg with us today to speak on Passados Presentes, slavery and memory tourism in Rio de Janeiro.
Thanks, Barbara, for such a wonderful introduction, really, to the field. And to me, as you know, I will always be very grateful for your generosity. And I would also like to thank the King Juan Carlos Center for having me. It's been a wonderful time here. And thank everyone for coming tonight, especially as I'm going to talk about a specific project called Passados Presentes. We have here our designer, Andrés Castro, who lives in New York, and he's responsible for all the design that you are going to see today. So in this talk, what I intend to do is to describe this project, which is really about um, the memory of slavery and how we can, um, in some ways, translate this into a project on tourism in Rio, but also to talk about the challenges that we are facing as historians, as public historians, while we do that. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Um, so this is, and I really like the way Barbara started talking about public history, because those challenges that we are facing as we develop this project are really challenges about how to be public historians nowadays. So anyway, this project is being developed with two colleagues, Professors Abby Matos and Marta Abreu, both based in Rio. And the three of us are, they have been working on this for the past 20 years, and I joined in when we decided to work with technology and also with tourism. But, so instead of talking too much, I'm going to talk a bit, but also show you, better than talk, some of the features of our project.
tráfico atlântico de africanos escravizados para as Américas é considerado pela ONU como um crime contra a humanidade. O Estado brasileiro, nascido em 1822, teve responsabilidade direta nesse processo, dos horrores da travessia à violência da escravização em terras brasileiras. Apesar disso, a presença africana no Brasil deixou um legado cultural inestimável, hoje oficialmente reconhecido em diversos patrimônios do país, entre os quais o jongo do Sudeste. Com o objetivo de reconhecer essas histórias e estimular o turismo de memória no Rio de Janeiro, o projeto Passados Presentes, Memória da Escravidão no Brasil, em parceria com as comunidades, está construindo exposições permanentes no Quilombo do Bracuí, no Quilombo de São José da Serra e na cidade de Pinheiral. A sinalização turística e os memoriais a céu aberto buscam honrar as vítimas da tragédia, da escravização e celebrar o patrimônio cultural negro erguido em terras brasileiras pelos que sobreviveram.
Essas são as ruínas da fazenda São José do Pinheiro. Foi uma próspera fazenda de café na época do Brasil Império. Foi uma das maiores fazendas do Brasil, era considerada até um palácio. E aqui foi um celeiro de escravos. Viveram aqui milhares de negros escravizados. E nós herdamos desses negros a tradição da dança do jongo, a qual nós mantemos até hoje. A UNESCO mapeou 100 pontos da presença do negro na rota do Atlântico, entendendo que a cidade de Pinheiral, o Quilombo do Bracuí, em Angra dos Reis, e o Quilombo São José da Serra, em Valença, fazem parte desse mapeamento. Então, foi idealizado esse projeto Passados Presentes, que resultou no mapeamento de 10 a 12 pontos, né? Um deles são 10 que foram mapeados dentro dos quilombos, e o nosso, como é urbano, foi na cidade, né? Então a gente mapeou onde houve a presença do negro, principalmente do negro jongueiro, na cidade de Pinheiral.
As you were able to see in the introduction of our video, our project relies as much in the historical knowledge as in the much more actually in the memories of the traditional communities, the so-called quilombos, um, that we have been able to interview and work with in the past years. They were first created by the descendants of slaves that were freed in 1888 and then kept as a big part of their identity over these 130 years. This year, Brazil is, I don't know if you can say celebrating, but maybe commemorating 130 years of the abolition of slavery, which is amazing. That's only 130 years of the abolition of slavery. And that's interesting because differently than the US, the Atlantic slave trade was open in Brazil until the 1850s, illegally, but was open. And only in the 19th century, 2.5 million Africans were brought to the country. That meant that in the beginning of the 20th century, many of those Africans were still alive. And some of the people that we are going to see here in the video, as Fatinha, who was the first that appeared there, she was probably the grandson or granddaughter or great-granddaughter or people that lived during slavery. Doesn't mean they were necessarily Africans, but lived during slavery. The memory of slavery in Brazil, especially in the coffee plantation areas, in the Paraíba Valley, between the state of Rio and São Paulo, is very much alive today. And this is alive because that by the time slavery was abolished only 130 years ago, most of the members of those communities remained in the same place. There is a narrative about the moving of many of the descendants of the slaves to the big cities such as Rio and São Paulo or Recife in the Northeast, which really happened. But for most of the members of the former slave communities, it was actually safer to stay where they were, where people would know them. So in some ways, to stay where they were, especially during the slavery time, was a way to fight against the vulnerability of that specific populations. So nowadays, the culture and their memories of the slave past became also important political tools for them to be formally recognized as Quilombo communities, which includes property rights over the lands, and also a way, and that's part of where our project fits in, to create sustainable ways in which they could live, having gained money with their memories. So when we designed that project together, and when they told us, it's not all the communities that want to receive visitors. So when those particular communities told us that they wanted to receive visitors and they wanted to tell their stories, they are also telling us that this is, by the memory being the most valuable thing they have, they also wanted to make a living out of that. And that's exactly where our project fits in.
Passados Presentes é um projeto de turismo de memória inédito no país. 4 roteiros, a partir de um aplicativo para celular, conduzem os visitantes a locais emblemáticos para o tráfico negreiro e a história da escravidão no Brasil, em trajetos pelo Quilombo do Bracuí, Quilombo de São José, Cidade de Pinheiral e pelo centro do Rio de Janeiro. Cada um dos circuitos contará também com uma exposição permanente sobre a história e cultura locais.
Oi, gente, nasci na Angola, Angola que me criou. Eu sou neto de Moçambique, meu Deus do céu, eu sou negro, sim, senhor. Lê, 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 lê. Lê, 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 lê. Lê, 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 lê.
Nos quilombos e na cidade de Pinheiral, os pontos de memória foram identificados pelos moradores, descendentes diretos da última geração de africanos, em parceria com as historiadoras que coordenam o projeto. São eles que contam a história local a partir do que ouviram de seus pais e avós.
Então aqui começa a trilha. Quando o pessoal vem, eles adoram passar aqui, né? Aí eu vou falando das árvores, dos palmitos.
E aqui foi uma fazenda que eles receberam príncipes aqui. O Rio Paraíba era navegável, se trabalhava-se o Rio Paraíba. Era uma casa, um casarão, assim, muito bonito.
Olha que paredão aqui, ó, feito pelos escravos. Então, aqui é onde saía a água para mover o moinho, tá? Aqui era um moinho velho. Olha, aqui dá para acessar a internet, tá? Pode comunicar, mandar fotografia.
Todos os pontos de interesse histórico estão demarcados com a logomarca Passados Presentes e um código QR. O visitante abre o aplicativo, aproxima o celular do código e tem acesso às principais informações sobre o local.
jongueiro velho, nos
Isso.
tempos atuais, fazendo uma ginástica.
Ginástica.
Para ficar sarado.
Ficar saradão. É isso aí que o Gonzaguinha gosta.
I forgot to mention when I was introducing André that he's also the artist that made the, the paintings around the exhibits. So I just want to briefly show you the website also in Portuguese and English, so you can all search everything there and download the apps for Android and Apple phones. Um, we we have this database that is drawn from the inventory sponsored by UNESCO of 100 sites of memory in the whole country, which is here. So in all, each red dot comes with an entry, sometimes with pictures, sometimes references, but all with some history related to the place. We are still doing this. We are not stopping with that. So it was in the beginning 100 places. Now we are keep going and including more and more places. So far only in Brazil, but we also expect to expand this at some point in the future. And also in the website, you can see all the 4 maps we made, one for the Quilombo do Bracuí, 4 maps, no, 4 tours, Quilombo de São José, Jongo de Pinheiral, and also Pequena África that I will show you in a minute. So if you scroll down, you see here the links to download both apps. You could actually download the whole project in one app, but it's pretty heavy, so you probably don't want to do that. So here's the Android, here's the iOS. So here's the tour that you can either do by yourself or you can hire, and there's reference people from the communities to do it. The little trick that we did is that you can find all the information about the project on the website and on the apps. But you can't find what you're gonna see when you actually put your phone in front of the QR code that are spread around the area. As we are far from there, and normally I don't tell what's there, but as we are pretty far, I will tell you. So what we did is when you go there and you scan the QR code, you can actually hear the voices of the community telling the stories about that place. And that's how we were able to connect their own voices and the way they were explaining the places that they selected and they found important to the people that is going to visit, and not always will be able to contact them, and they also are not always available to tour them around. So we really encourage people to contact them, but if that's not possible, they can unlock the QR code and actually hear their voices. This is extremely important to me because that makes the most important goal of our project, which is for people to go there. We don't want them to get all the information and stay where they are. We want them to be able to go. Of course, not everyone can go, so we say a lot here. But that's, that's a feature that the technology provides. And it's interesting to me because normally technology is known for putting people apart. And that's a way, especially the apps from the phones. Everyone knows here that, you know, the more we look at the apps, the less we connect with people. So this is an idea that we can actually use the app to connect with the place and to try to really see the people behind the knowledge, the people behind the place. Some of those places you go there and you see nothing. You won't see a thing if you don't have the information. So what really makes each site a historical site, it's not always what you see. In most times is what you know because of that the people's memory. So at the end, we added the fourth place, which is Pequena Africa in the port area of Rio, which became the Valongo Wharf, which is the wharf that received the most enslaved Africans in the New World. So the whole time of enslavement. It's a title we are not proud of, but that's the approximately 1 million enslaved Africans around only in the port of Rio. And it became a World Heritage Site in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So we made, with the help of an urban quilombo in the area called Pedra do Sal, we made this fourth tour, which is a selection of 60 places that we marked on the here on Rio. I'm not going to in the details, but you can scroll and then we can see. So Rio is actually wasn't part of the project in the beginning and was added as we saw as we saw the Valongo Wharf being like growing as a place for visitors. And that's my last little teaser.
A presença africana e o patrimônio cultural negro marcaram para sempre a zona portuária do Rio de Janeiro, principal porto do tráfico atlântico de escravizados até meados do século XIX.
Coração do samba, a Pequena África é também o centro de resistência política e de criação da cultura negra carioca, com seus sindicatos, capoeiras e casas de samba. O Circuito Pequena África conta com 19 pontos assinalados no mapa. Em alguns deles, códigos QR permitem ouvir a voz de lideranças comunitárias e de historiadores, nos falando sobre a importância histórica da região.
Outros pontos, vários dos quais sobre as atuais rodas de rua da capoeira da cidade, completam o roteiro e podem ser acessados na função Perto de Mim. Visite o site passadospresentes.com.br, baixe o aplicativo e venha com a gente.
So now done with the advertisement of the project, I want to face and raise some of the challenges and problems and questions we are having about this. First of all, this is a project, as you see, that puts together traditional knowledge, historical knowledge, technology, and design. And in some ways, we are all together trying to make a specific kind of knowledge public and known by the society. The central component of what we are going to say, of what we want people to understand, is that this group of people, which is nowadays a vulnerable group of people, they have been keeping, and nowadays they keep the memory of a genocide. They keep the memory of the Atlantic slave trade, the memory of the illegal enslavement, the memory of slavery, and the memory of their fights to survive and to create all kinds of cultural and personal and family and working ways to survive Brazilian racism. This is a story that, it's as surprising as it is not known by everyone in the Brazilian society. And it's not known by everyone outside of Brazil. We think that who misses this point doesn't really know anything about Brazil. So that's our main goal. We want to make this knowledge public, all of us together. But then we have our own concerns and questions. The first challenge is about the kind of history we are writing. This is a collaborative project. Just historians, we are 3, so we are 6 hands. we fight over every word because we don't have that many words. We have the app is pretty small, and our tech guys and designers they always say you write too much, so you have to cut. You cut. So we are writing signs, and those signs are not going to be read by people who knows and who are interested. We need to make them interested in our topic. So, and then after this is printed, it's printed and it's there in the middle of the street. So the challenge of the historical writing, we are not writing an article or a book. Believe me, you can write 10 dissertations and will be easier than write an app. Um, so to do that, this kind of collaborative work takes a lot and takes a lot of our own sense of authorship. We are all very proud of our words and the ways you write. We need to forget that. And we actually need to hear much more about the non-professional writings than actually impose our way to do things. I think that even though public historians have been doing this in the past decade, we are still in the beginning of really thinking about writing and reading for an audience that it's really not aware of the subject and not really interested in the first place. So it's probably this. I mean, this is one of our main tasks. But I have to say we are growing very much as historians too, and probably as writers as we do that. You know, I won't say to everyone that we work with that we are doing this much better because we fight a lot, but that's the truth. I think we are doing this better. The second task and big challenge that I think we need to face is to take the tourism industry more seriously as public historians. Um, now, tourism is the world's largest industry now, and as you can see from here, it grew from 25 million to 689 million per year. It grows at an annual average of 7%. I'm just talking about international tourism, not about domestic tourism, which is pretty big in places like the US, like Spain, like France. And when we think about the tourism industry, the one that is really growing because it's new, it's the so-called tourism of memory, heritage tourism, or things like that. And this data is all from the UNESCO website on tourism. And even though they are very concerned about the problems with the local communities and the environment that tourism brings, they also want to think about and to create ways in which the visitors can actually go there. So this is just a map to show the World Heritage sites that UNESCO recognized as World Heritage. And of course, the slave route is a recent one, but it's also a growing one. As groups in Africa, in the Caribbean have been very active. In Brazil, we entered this wave kind of late, but doing this project. Uruguay, Argentina, France, Portugal and Spain are entering now, and Mexico and the US. So the number of sites that are related to slavery, they are growing very fast as being recognized by UNESCO in the past years. As I said before, as Rio sport area, the Valongo Wharf was recognized as a World Heritage Place, this also comes with certain duties by the Rio city that they have to comply, which also means paying attention and spending money in a way that they can make each area ready for that visit. But what I want to ask, and what we have been asking ourselves, and we don't have answers for those questions, is first, how can we thinking that tourism is growing and probably will continue to grow? How can we work with tourism in a meaningful way, in a respectful way? How can we go beyond the common sense? And even how, if I don't even know if that's um, totally possible, but if we understand and if we believe that tourism can go beyond the entertainment, how can we work with that connection between tourism and memory? How can we make this industry profitable for those who actually own the knowledge? And I have to say that we've been trying, we all have been trying to work with the communities, and it's extremely hard. It's hard to set up a price for them to be tourists. It's hard to set up a way for them to sell what they want to sell. It's food, it's arts, it's crafts, t-shirts, books. It's hard for the visitors to, not all of them, of course, but to visitors to understand that that they have to pay when they go there. And it's actually hard for some of the schools that go there to also, that bring students. And I know that not everyone does that, but I kind of think in that sense students as tourists too. It's hard for the schools to think of a way to bring their students there in a way that is also respectful and meaningful for all of them. So that's part of our set of questions. If tourism is such a big industry and such an important industry, how can we make this more democratic, really? And how can we we can help them making this really be profitable? And if we don't, what's the validity of this? And in some ways, as public historians, of course, we want to do something, a product, an app, a website, but we also, of course, are thinking critically about our object. And there is a crucial part of that that it's being very discussed nowadays, and it's very hard to deal with. There are two recent examples that I will show you, and I think that I can describe better what I'm thinking about. One is about the visitors. This is a fake selfie. It's a selfie taken from that website forward.com, and I'm using this one because I can't use the real ones. So they use this for an article they wrote. But and that's the title of their article. Can Auschwitz be a graveyard and a tourist destination? Of course, all of us have heard all these discussions about how can we visit sites related to the Holocaust. Should we visit, and how can we control the visitors' behavior? Of course, we can't control the visitors' behavior. We can't say to them, just the ones who are not offensive can go. We can't really, as we are teaching or as we are talking or as someone is reading our books, we can't really control the visitors. But we want to because we have this specific meaning that we want to say. That we wanna portray. And as the same way that there's not a book without a reader, is there a site of memory without visitors? So some people defend the idea that some of those sites of memory shouldn't be open to the public to be preserved. But then, if they are preserved, meaning that they will have no visitors, what's the meaning of that in the present? Can we say that a place have a site of memory? When you go to Auschwitz, you see the entrance, but in many concentration camps, actually now, you go to the place and you actually see nothing. It's the same thing as a site related to the memory of the slave trade. We have the knowledge of what happened there, and it's the knowledge and the people who give meaning to that. this is an ongoing discussion, and it's a very important one, I think. But it's really something that I think we should um, think critically in terms of what we are doing, how can we work with the visitors, and what we can um, really propose in order not just to say we don't want visitors here because they're going to ruin the site. So I think that's a very hard task and a big challenge. The second one, which is related to what you are seeing here, is about nostalgia. It's not about the visitors, it's about who is telling the story. Now this image is from the plantation Santa Eufrásia in Vassouras, in the heart of the Paraíba Valley. And this woman, she's the owner of the plantation. She doesn't have anything to do with the slave past. She didn't inherit. She bought this plantation afterwards. And she opened up the plantation to visitors, and she created herself a theater when she performed. I mean, she used to do that because now she doesn't do anymore. But she performed the mistress, and she had people that worked in her place as domestic workers, as um, as enslaved women. This is a very known story here in the U.S. Um, it's not that known in Brazil. I have to say that in the 1980s, I have seen this myself as a visitor in the same city. It's the afternoon tea being served by black women dressed as if they were living in 19th century and serving you, of course, all whites, as if they were slaves. So this is recent and was happening in 2016 until a denounce was made in the website The Intercept, and a very interesting and good public prosecutor went there and shut down the plantation and made they changed everything. But I'm saying that here because I think that, of course, as historians, we can't control the historic information that people make. But the more we do this kind of work, the harder it is for people to to build a narrative that is based on nostalgia, that is based on the fact that they have the old times of the old times of coffee in Brazil, and such and such. So it's really like, in some ways, it's a defense of the work of the public historians, but it's also a way in which I think that if we nowadays, if we don't step up and do that, this work will be done because people want to visit the plantations. They want to go there. They want to see the slave quarters. And you can't imagine the things that I've heard while visiting with my kids, as if I were a tourist, like, faking as a tourist, in those plantations. It's unimaginable. And sometimes they mean super well, but the information is all wrong. This leads us to another set of questions, and with that, I will end. Of course, this project is a political project, and we recognize this very openly. We are historians, public historians doing political work, as Barbara said in the beginning. We side with the quilombolas, we defend reparation rights, we are biased. And there's lots of people that raise questions about being, how valid is our work, how do you work with notions of truth, how reliable are your information, the fact that you're being so biased. I won't even go there and answer this, but I just say that given the centrality of the public discussion over the slave past nowadays, this is not at all a small issue. There is, a growing notion in Brazil, but not just in Brazil, that the past is irrelevant to the present. And I think that here in the US, we also have terrible examples of this. And um, I think that public historians now are really central to make this a important issue. Um, I'm sorry. I want to finish with a mention to Marielle Franco, which is the only black woman as a member of the city council in the big city of Rio de Janeiro that were murdered on 3 weeks ago on March 15, as a defender of women rights, LGBT rights, black rights, Quilombo rights, of course, human rights. And even though we don't know exactly who caused, who killed, we know exactly the troubles that her image was causing to the Brazilian elite, to the Rio elite, and to the ones who are against this kind of rights. And that made me think, going back to, to the whole idea of who misses the information about the Brazilian slave past, of the fact that the Brazilian society was born from on top of a genocide, and the fact that we have so much racism nowadays, that the only black woman is the one that is killed in a terrible way. It makes our work as public historians, I think, much more important. And in fact, this is probably our responsibility more than ever. Thank you.
My name is Matthew Mead. I first went to Brazil in 1987. In 1988, I led a group of people, faculty members. I'm a retired faculty member from the City University, and we went to Brazil. There's a couple of things that I've noted there, which of course are similar here in the United States with some differences. We find that there was this recognition of quilombos, which in a sense were places where mostly black Brazilians resided, and there was attempts by some presidents to turn them over to the ownership of the people who resided there, and that was only partially done, not really fully done. And what you have is then the situation in respect to the economy there is sort of like really convoluted. What we did in taking tour groups down, and I've done this for the past 20-odd years, is to adopt certain institutions there, either private schools, ILAEA, Oladun, other groups, and I would have my people to make arrangements to bring down materials so they could bring them through without being charged some kind of tariffs and so on, and actually donate them to them. And we also, for example, we go to the favelas to actually go there and to participate in providing some economic address. The hotels that we stayed at, for example, would argue against that. They would say not to go to these places. They're dangerous and that kind of thing. We've gone and we've never had any problems in any time that we've gone. And as I said, I've been doing this for the past 20-odd years or so. The problem seems to be that even, for example, with Carnival, blacks there are the attractions for Carnival for most of the time. At least, certainly that's true in Salvador, where I've spent most of my time. But they get almost nothing from these tourist dollars. They have to buy products from the corporations pretty much at retail prices, and they can't sell them any more expensively because the competition is such there. They have to work very hard. They can't leave their places of business, and the government and the private corporations are those who benefit from this type of situation. So I'm a little bit skeptical about how this is going to work because the economic structures is still pretty much the same. I want to add another little point, the educational system. What we also did when we went there is that we brought things for the private schools that were there. And as you know, in Brazil, the public schools are pure, very bad. And so what happens is that the upper income groups have public education, private education for their children so that they can later on pass this SEEB, it's an examination, the vestibular, which is very difficult, and most of the public schools don't prepare them for. And so then the higher education schools are free. They are, unlike here in the United States, except for my school, City University, which used to be free, and now they're coming back with a so-called special type of program there. So these kinds of things are militating against, for example, the people, the memory that you're doing, actually, in a sense, benefiting and pulling themselves up. And I'm wondering, what are you doing as opposed to this? What are you doing to try to somehow, ameliorate that situation? In other words, the whole situation of not having full rights, not having an education system in which they can benefit from, and not being able to really be involved in the economic system that predominates Brazil today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for your question. Well, of course, those are very big and hard tasks to change the economic situation and our education situation too. But there are some things happening and of course everything kind of stops in 2016 after the coup that happened in Brazil that resulted from the impeachment of the President Dilma. But even after that, in the past 12, 15 years, there is a growing movement really led by the black social movement, by the various black movements, that is asking for the increase of the teaching of African history and Afro-Brazilian history and culture in the schools. That became a law in 2003. And as you know Brazil, you probably know too that there are laws that pegam and laws that don't. Some laws that are enforced and some laws that are they're not. This law is one that really is being enforced, and thanks to the groups that were really pressing for it. So as a result for that, we consider this part of the material education, but there's lots of textbooks being written. There are the curriculum is changing in many schools to have more of not only African and Afro-Brazilian history and culture, but also indigenous, and we are much behind in that sense, history and culture in the schools. So this is, of course, this is a huge task to change the whole system. And sometimes if we think of the big task, we can get paralyzed and not do anything. And especially when we don't have that much time, because the people want to see change in their time life. So for the ones who live in those quilombos, it's very important to be able to tell their stories. They want that. We have been, actually after that, we are working here with just 4 communities, but we get calls and contacts from people from other quilombo communities all over, and we are trying to get more funding for expanding the work on that. I mean, it's funny, I didn't say that before, but this was sponsored by Petrobras, which is the Brazilian oil company that went part of the huge, the corruption, in the middle of the corruption scandal that happened 3 years ago, and we actually never received all the money that were promised. But even though we are probably not changing everything, we are changing a bit. And we can see that. We can see that when you go to the public schools and you see all the Afro-Brazilian kids behaving in a different way. and much more now. You know that the Brazilian population officially wasn't majority black until 7 years ago, 8 years ago. That what changed, not the color of the Brazilian population. What changed is the fact that now the majority of the population will call themselves of Afro-descendant, of being officially black or pardos. And that's a huge change, because it's a change in the way you see yourself. It's a change in the way you see your own past as something that is actually good. You know, it's interesting thing happened to me some years ago, which is I received an email from someone that I never met, and that person writes to me about that first enslaved woman that I worked with, called Liberata, which lived in the south of Brazil in 1840, from the 1800s to 1820s or 30s maximum. And this guy says, "You don't know me, but I am a descendant of Liberata." And the way he knows that is because he's doing, all kinds of research, personal research, and he's talking to his aunts, blah, blah, blah. And he says, at some point our family became white, but we are from that area, and he knows everything about that place. He said that with an amazing pride. And that doesn't mean much if you think of all we have to face on faces while we are fighting racism. But there was a beginning on that. The thing that I find really challenging right now is when we see things like that happening, we also see there is such a strong conservative reaction that is happening at the same time, which I think is a known story for everyone here too, that it makes all the challenges a little harder, but also more urgent. So, even not achieving so much, I think we're achieving something.
Boa noite, Dra. Greenberg. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. What are your thoughts about Brazilian media, particularly global, in depicting Afro Brazilian presence on TV? I know since I've been watching Global, I've noticed a big change, or not big, little changes. I see more actors, commercials, advertisement. What are your thoughts about the media? And do you see, Global plays a very big role. Do you see them being a partner in your efforts? What are your thoughts?
Thanks for the question. This is actually super controversial. If you think the media as a whole, it couldn't be worse. And especially if you look at the Rio's newspapers, and O Globo, as you know, has a terrible newspaper that doesn't really inform you, doesn't really, it's really a bad journalism. As for the TV, Global, I think it's hard to really have just one thought about the TV. And that's because, in one hand, they also have terrible journalism. Not just the open TV, but also the cable TVs that are part of the Global. Global is our Citizen Kane enterprise. But I also think that in the middle of all that, there were some shows, and there were some soap operas, and there were some ways that not just blacks, but also gays, but also women, that have been portrayed in a way that is really being progressive. And I think that this happens because they don't have necessarily one group that would connect, and have send the message to everyone to act in such a way. But more important than that, Global is very much non-religious, and they're losing audience for the growing channels of um, the the ecclesiastic, evangelical groups. So now they need to fight against that. And they're not getting the evangelical groups as an audience. So what they do is that they try to get the non-religious ones. So I'm saying this in the past years, let's say 3, 4 years. It's true that they have been including much more blacks as actors. It's true that they have been including um, much more gays. The first big kiss, which was in the with the two most famous Brazilian actors in the past, I think was 2 years. That doesn't mean that I'm happy with them. But as you know, people go to the streets, to the demonstrations, saying, death to Rede Globo. I don't do that because to me, I have worse targets in the TV world. I think that in some ways, they are still doing a good job in terms of the behavior, but a terrible job in terms of journalism. So I don't know if that added or just complicated some things, but I see that really in the ways in which they are fighting for audience, and that audience that they are fighting are the Brazilian liberal elite that has money and for sure supported the coup, but they are not super traditional people in a way that they won't be against gay rights. They won't want their behavior to be controlled. They want to be able to use their drugs. So it's so that's it's and this is a behavior that is hard to describe in some ways, but that's who they are.
So thank you so much. This was really interesting to me. I don't have a deep knowledge of Brazil. I'm just starting to fall in love with that country. So this is the reason why I'm here. And I have two questions. The first question is truly informative. I'm not an historian. I would like to know more about this public history. This sounds very intriguing to me. I'm a classicist, so from a totally different. And the second aspect, I really appreciated the way you were able to show how problematic this kind of project is. So thank you so much, really thank you, because you were really, to the point, showing that it is problematic. And one problematic aspect which occurred to me, I have a little knowledge about cultural memory in other fields, and is there perhaps a risk of monumentalizing those places which are not, you were telling us they are not visible. If you go there, you wouldn't, if you don't know, you wouldn't know, basically. And how your project might change the aspect of those places. Are you I mean, of course you are conscious, and what is the very practical way you deal with this problem?
Well, thank you. We run that risk, really, not just to monumentalize the places, but also to monumentalize the knowledge too. I mean, the memory, because of course that memory changes over time. What not me, but what my colleagues heard as memories 20 years ago, it's not the same thing that they tell now, because as we have been learning with them, they also have been learning with us. So, for instance, Marilda, which is the person that walks on the palm trees, she has a totally different version of the arrival of the enslaved Africans now that she had before. Now she tells her story, someone that actually inherited the land from the master, as connected to the ones who were enslaved and arrived as the last generation of enslaved Africans. 20 years ago, they didn't do that. They would separate because they didn't want to connect, to identify with them, because they were the lowest part of the hierarchy. And this is not a problem at all for us who study memory and knows how this process goes. But this is a problem for the public in many ways because they want to monumentalize in the sense that they want this to be some kind of truth that they are gonna hear. So I think we face those two things: the monumentalization of places, and because this is based on knowledge, the we we need to provide a sophisticated understanding of the concept of memory in order for people just not to say, well, they're liars, or they are inventing this, or depending on who they are talking to, they tell different stories. So what's exactly? And I find this very complicated. And of course, only working with them and in the way we're learning with them, from them, we are really being able to face that. But now we have been trying to find and mark other spaces. And one of the things that I like about the technology, about the QR codes, is that we can actually change much more easily what we are saying. So we can have marks and we can change. And in that way, we sort of want to face this issue of monumentalization and how can we make this not some kind of static knowledge. But you said that you had a basic question about Brazilian.
No, the basic question was about if you can tell more, but maybe this is not the case, I don't know, about public history, which the very term, I'm not familiar with this, but maybe it's not interesting for the for the other people, so don't bother.
Yeah, just in one sentence, is history, it's non-academic history, and this is also controversial, but it's history made for the, bigger world society of people that is not professionals, readers, or academics. And in many ways, so many people say that all history is public and have always been. But as a science, not necessarily, because some of the things we write are not intended for everyone to read. So it's a discussion, but that's being very brief. I would say that's the meaning.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I did run a couple minutes late, so hopefully you didn't cover this. But I know part of the project is about exposure and getting awareness and global awareness. So I'm wondering, what is your strategy, or do you strategized thinking about the tourism industry, and particularly tourism partners, as you spoke about these type of history tours, these type of knowledge tours are becoming more and more popular. Certain countries, so I know a ton of agencies, Gate One Travel, all these travel agencies. Certain countries are more well known for that and kind of have that built into their tourism pamphlets or whatever. Brazil, when I look at Brazil, that's not one of the things that are highlighted. So what is your overall strategy to kind of work with that? Or is it in your strategy? And where do you see the tourism industry playing and other partners like UNESCO and things of that nature playing into this?
Well, I think that we can't fight the tourism industry, their very existence. I think we need to work with them. And the way we can work with them is to try to partner with small companies. There are many history teachers that want to work with tourism, and they want to create their own companies and work with that. So we haven't totally done that yet. But in my school, for instance, we are trying to partner with the tourism department and see whether we can. Our main goal is to make not the companies or the teachers or whoever brings people to the Quilombo communities to earn, and not the communities. So the basic thing for us is to help the communities to charge for this. This is so simple. It's the most complicated thing is to say to them, for instance, things like a feijoada, the meal that people eat there, can't cost 10 reais, $3. It has to be more expensive, and it has to be charged. So this kind of thing we have been trying to do, and there are professionals in Brazil, in our group actually, that do that. But it's hard. It's hard because it requires people that would be in permanent contact with the communities to sort of set up. They need a union. They need to be organized in a way that they don't, they don't feel like if they charge too much, people would go to the next one. You know, so that's one part of it. We are also, our group, we are trying to develop, and we're really, as you can imagine, are low on funding now in Brazil. But we are trying to set up a project to train guides, and especially the guides coming from the communities and the cities. So this is part of the training for the teaching of history as a whole, but specifically as tourist guides. So we're trying to do that. And you're right, Brazil is not very big on that. And Rio is not even the biggest city on that kind of tourism. Salvador in Bahia grew in the past, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, as being the black capital of Brazil, and they worked in good ways and bad ways, but as a destination for foreigners that wanted to experience black Brazilian culture. So Rio doesn't have that identity. Rio has an identity that is connected to carnival, yes, but the carnival doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to visiting the Christ, to the beaches, environment, and not just to talk about the sex industry. But that's Rio needs another or a connected identity in order to work with that tourism. The fact that UNESCO recognized the Valongo Wharf, and it's not just the wharf, but the whole area, which includes the Quilombo of Pedra do Sal, but also includes the cemetery of the newly arrived blacks, the Pretos Novos, as part of the World Heritage Area, has the potential to bring more people. When I say has the potential, because in some ways we kind of missed it after the Olympics. I have this strong feeling that we missed a lot as the Olympics passed, and we were not able to, to bring everything and to make people go while everyone was looking at Rio. And now we are in this huge economic crisis. We have money for nothing, and we have an increase of urban violence, and we, of course, have less and less visitors. So we want to do all that, but one step at a time.
I wanted to thank you so much for that presentation, and just to comment really on how I saw the title of the talk, Passados Presentes, and I didn't understand just how much the focus was on the living memory of enslavement, right, that's been passed on for generations. Because, for example, the memory tourism on the west coast of Africa, it's all about loss, disassociation, alienation, and the fact that this has just an understanding that this continues to be part of the Brazilian culture, the Brazilian heritage, and the importance, the kind of living importance. I just really love that. And it does, I wonder, when you talked about the kind of not an equivalent for indigenous communities, but this is just an exciting model if you could think about this colonialism, which has a very different aspect in Mexico, for example, which is the area that I study. Right? How can you frame this tragedia, right, in a way that gives you a different perspective of the reality of the day? It's not really a question. I just want to thank you.
Oh, thank you. Just to comment briefly on your two comments. First, I think in some ways this could be used as a model. And the Museum of African American History, the new Smithsonian one, they are in touch with us to sort of export this to to communities in Mozambique and also in the Caribbean, and we are trying to find ways in which we can connect to oral historians there and make this usable. And one of the things is that this is all this computer thing and the technology and the app can be opened. So our idea is that we can, make people use the way they want. But the second one, I also want to thank you for this because one of the very, very important things for our group is that, of course, this is a story of a genocide. It's a story of death. But the people we're working with, they are alive, and they wanna tell the story of the survival. That's what they tell you when you go there. That's what you ended up seeing, the jungle. You see them dancing, and not as a fake idea of joy and happiness when there's just sadness, but as a true way of surviving, of surviving this. So all this, especially the jungle in this area, but you can also say the same about samba in Rio and about capoeira also in this area. It's really about cultural survival, and that's about their lives and their presence. So it's very much about honoring that too.
Okay, well, thank you, and I hope everybody will join us in the atrium and we can continue this conversation